The year was 1969, somewhere between Icy Cape and Point Barrow. Along the desolate northern shores of Alaska, a group of Inupiat hunters trudged across the frozen wasteland. The temperature hung at 40 below zero. Ice stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by jagged pressure ridges that rose like tombstones from the white expanse. Then they saw it. A massive steel hull, rust-stained and battered, locked in the grip of pack ice. No smoke rose from its stack. No flags flew from its mast. No name marked its bow. But these hunters knew exactly what they were looking at. Everyone who lived along this godforsaken coast knew the stories, knew the legend. It was the Baychimo, the ghost ship, the wanderer of the Arctic. 38 years had passed since its crew abandoned it to the ice. 38 years of drifting through the most hostile waters on Earth, without fuel, without power, without a single living soul aboard. And here it was, appearing one final time before vanishing into the Arctic mist forever. That sighting in 1969 was the last confirmed encounter. Since then, 54 years of silence, no wreckage found, no debris washed ashore, just an absence so profound it haunts maritime historians to this day. Because when a 1,300-ton steel cargo ship simply disappears without a trace, you're left with a question that refuses to die. Where is the Baychimo now? This isn't some sailor's tale spun in a dockside tavern. This isn't the Flying Dutchman or the Mary Celeste wrapped in centuries of embellishment and myth. This is documented history. Photographs exist. Official reports were filed. Dozens of credible witnesses, from experienced ship captains to indigenous hunters, saw this vessel with their own eyes. Year after year, decade after decade, the Baychimo defied every law of physics and probability. Ships don't survive unmanned in the Arctic. The ice crushes them. Storms tear them apart. The relentless cold breaks them down piece by piece. Yet somehow, this ordinary cargo steamer became something extraordinary. Something that still has the Alaskan government searching the depths, hoping to solve a mystery that began in the winter of 1931. How does a ship survive nearly 4 decades without a crew in the most brutal environment on the planet? Why did every attempt to salvage it fail in ways that seemed almost supernatural? And most haunting of all, if it truly sank, why has no one ever found the wreckage? Tonight, we're diving into the true story of the SS Baychimo, the only real-world ghost ship that governments are still actively hunting. This is a story about human survival against impossible odds, about a captain's prophetic warnings ignored, about indigenous hunters trapped aboard a derelict vessel for 10 terrifying days, and about a steel ship that seemed to have a will of its own. Some say it was just luck and ocean currents. Others whisper about something darker, something the Arctic ice refuses to give up. The truth, as you'll discover, might be far stranger than either explanation. To understand how an ordinary cargo ship became the Arctic's most enduring mystery, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to 1914, in the shipyards of Gothenburg, Sweden, where skilled craftsmen were building a vessel that would outlive every expectation. The ship launched that year bore the name Ångermanälven, after one of Sweden's longest rivers, 230 feet of steel hull, 1,322 tons, a triple expansion steam engine that could push her through water at 10 knots. She was solid, unremarkable, built for the mundane work of shuttling cargo between Hamburg and Sweden for the German shipping company Baltische Reederei. Nothing about her suggested she would become legendary. The ship served Germany throughout World War I, protected by the Imperial Navy as she made her runs across the Baltic Sea. But when the war ended, Germany's defeat came with a price. Under Article 244 of the Treaty of Versailles, the victorious powers seized German vessels as war reparations. The Ångermanälven became British property, sailed to London by a crew who would never see their homeland again, and put up for sale. In 1921, the Hudson's Bay Company saw an opportunity. They needed ships capable of withstanding the most brutal conditions on Earth. The Arctic trading routes demanded vessels with reinforced hulls, ships that could shoulder their way through pack ice and survive temperatures that would kill a man in minutes. This Swedish-built steamer, available for £15,000, was exactly what they needed, far cheaper than building new. They renamed her Baychimo after a trading post in Quebec and gave her a new purpose. From her home port in Ardrossan, Scotland, the Baychimo would undertake some of the most dangerous voyages in maritime history. She sailed through the Panama Canal, up the western coast of North America, threading her way through Alaskan waters to the remote trading posts along the Yukon and Northwest Territories. Her mission was simple but deadly serious: deliver food, tools, and supplies to isolated settlements, and return with precious fur pelts from Inuit trappers. The Arctic, in the 1,920 seconds and early 1,930 seconds, wasn't just dangerous. It was a frozen hell that tested every ship and every man who dared enter its waters. Temperatures plunged to 60 below zero. Pack ice moved with terrifying unpredictability, grinding and crushing anything caught between the floes. At night, the ice sang its eerie song, creaking and groaning in a sound that haunted sailors' dreams long after they returned to warmer waters. The Baychimo proved herself worthy of these challenges. She even completed a circumnavigation of the globe, passing through both the Panama and Suez canals during her service years. But every voyage north was a gamble with death. In 1924, another Hudson's Bay Company vessel, the three-masted schooner Lady Kindersley, became trapped in pack ice off Point Barrow. For nearly a month, her crew watched helplessly as the ice carried them north, farther from land, farther from hope. They cached food supplies on the ice, prepared for the worst. Finally, the captain surrendered to reality. The crew walked across the frozen sea to another ship that had risked everything to get close enough to save them. The Baychimo participated in the rescue effort, recovering cargo from the doomed Lady Kindersley. It was a grim preview of her own fate, though no one knew it then. The man commanding the Baychimo through most of her Arctic service was Captain Sidney Cornwell, who took the helm in 1922. Cornwell was no novice. He understood the Arctic's treachery intimately. In 1930, he wrote to his superiors with brutal honesty about the close calls they'd survived, saying that on several occasions, he'd only gotten the ship out by a margin of a few hours. Then came 1,931. Before the season's first voyage, Cornwell sent another warning to Hudson's Bay Company headquarters. His words carried the weight of hard-earned experience, and something that, in hindsight, sounds almost prophetic. He wrote that the Baychimo was not strong enough to work through heavy Arctic ice without sustaining serious damage to the ship. The company ordered her out anyway. On July 24th, Itenjobai Century, the Baychimo steamed out of port on what should have been a routine supply run. She crossed the Arctic Circle on July 25th. By July 26th, she hit solid pack ice at Wainwright, and Cornwell dropped anchor, watching, waiting for conditions to improve. They didn't. For days. The ice held them prisoner. The Arctic was setting its trap. And the Baychimo, despite her captain's warnings, despite her proven record, despite everything she'd survived before, was about to become something no one expected. She was about to become immortal. By late September 1931, the Baychimo had completed her trading run along the northern coast. Her holds were packed with valuable fur pelts, bound for Vancouver. Captain Cornwell and his crew of 37 men knew they were cutting it close. Winter came early and viciously in these waters, and they needed to make it south before the ice locked them in for the season. They didn't make it. On October 1st, near the Seahorse Islands close to Point Barrow, the ice caught them. Pack ice surrounded the ship, squeezing, holding fast. Cornwell made the decision to temporarily abandon ship. The crew grabbed what supplies they could and walked over half a mile across the frozen sea to the town of Barrow, seeking shelter from the brutal conditions. 2 days later, when they returned, something unexpected had happened. The Baychimo had broken free. She was floating in open water, as if the Arctic had changed its mind. Hope flickered. Maybe they could still make the run south. But on October 8th, the ice returned. This time, it held the ship in a grip far more savage than before. The Baychimo wasn't going anywhere. Cornwell assessed the situation with the cold pragmatism of an experienced Arctic captain. They would have to winter here, locked in the ice off the northern coast of Alaska, waiting for spring thaw that wouldn't come for 6 months. On October 15th, the Hudson's Bay Company dispatched aircraft to retrieve 22 of the crew. The planes came and went, their engines fading into the Arctic silence. 15 men remained behind with Captain Cornwell. They'd made their choice. They would stay with the ship, protect the valuable cargo, and wait out the winter. The problem was simple and brutal. The steel-hulled Baychimo couldn't be heated adequately throughout an Arctic winter. Living aboard would mean freezing to death. So the men did what Arctic survivors have always done. They adapted, using materials scavenged from the ship: hatches, tarpaulins, lumber, whatever they could salvage. The 15 men constructed a wooden shelter on the ice. It wasn't much. 4 walls and a roof against temperatures that would drop to 60 below zero, but it was warmer than the ship's steel interior, and it kept them alive. October bled into November. Each day, crew members made the trek back to the Baychimo, chipping away ice that formed around the rudder and other critical equipment. The work was exhausting, dangerous, and seemingly endless. The ship groaned and creaked as the ice squeezed her hull. At night, the men huddled in their shelter, listening to the Arctic sing its death song. By late October, they'd been stranded so long that newspapers caught up with them. Articles arrived describing their own peril. Surreal dispatches from the outside world to men living on the edge of it. They read about themselves like obituaries for people not yet dead. November 24th arrived with an ominous change. The temperature, which had been hovering around 60 below, suddenly rose to 0. In the Arctic, such dramatic shifts signal something terrible approaching. The men felt it in their bones before they saw it in the sky. Then the blizzard hit. For 3 days, the storm raged with a fury that defied description. Wind screamed across the ice at speeds that could rip a man off his feet and hurl him into oblivion. Snow fell so thick it turned day into twilight, twilight into absolute darkness. The 15 men crouched in their wooden shelter, praying it would hold, listening to the storm, trying to tear the world apart. When the wind finally died on the 3rd day, the survivors emerged into an eerie, crystalline silence, the kind of quiet that feels wrong after such violence. They looked toward where the Baychimo had been anchored. The ship was gone. In its place stood a mountain of fractured ice, 30 feet high, jagged and blue-white in the weak Arctic sun. The men climbed the ice ridge, scanning the horizon desperately. Nothing. They walked the shoreline, their breath freezing in clouds around their faces. No wreckage. No debris. No sign that a 1,300-ton steel vessel had ever existed. Captain Cornwell made the only logical conclusion. The Baychimo had been crushed by the ice during the storm, shattered into pieces, and dragged to the bottom of the Beaufort Sea. His ship was gone. After 9 years commanding her through the worst the Arctic could throw at them, she finally met her end. The men prepared to wait for rescue, grieving for the ship they'd lost, accepting that the sea had claimed another victim. Then, several days later, an Inuk seal hunter made contact with the stranded crew. He had news that seemed impossible. He'd seen the Baychimo, alive, intact, trapped in ice approximately 45 miles south of their position. Cornwell and his men couldn't believe it. The ship had been ripped free from its moorings by the storm, carried dozens of miles through howling darkness and crushing ice, and somehow survived. But when they tracked her down and managed to board, what they found broke their hearts. The Baychimo was battered beyond recognition. Her hull bore deep gashes. Equipment was smashed. She'd been through hell during that solo journey through the storm, ricocheting off ice floes, at the mercy of forces no ship should survive. Cornwell, the man who'd commanded her for 9 years, made the hardest decision of his career. She was no longer seaworthy. She would never make it south. The most humane thing, the only logical thing, was to abandon her. The crew salvaged the most valuable fur pelts from the hold. They took what personal belongings they could carry. Then, one by one, they climbed down from the Baychimo for the last time, walking away across the ice, leaving her locked in the pack ice near Alaska's northern coast. In March 1932, Captain Cornwell and the remaining crew flew back to Vancouver. The Hudson's Bay Company filed the paperwork. Loss of vessel, negligible cargo remaining aboard. The Baychimo was officially written off, stricken from the company's fleet roster, consigned to the columns of maritime losses. The company expected that would be the end of it. The Arctic would do what the Arctic always does. The ice would crush the abandoned hull, or she'd sink during spring thaw, and that would be that. But the Baychimo had other plans. Shortly after the crew's departure, reports began filtering in. The ship had been spotted approximately 300 miles east of where they'd abandoned her. She was floating free, moving with the pack ice, utterly alone. In March 1932, just weeks after Cornwell had signed the lost paperwork, a man named Leslie Melvin was traveling to Nome with his dog sled team. As he crossed the frozen Beaufort Sea, he looked up and saw something that made him stop cold. The Baychimo, drifting peacefully near the Alaskan shore. No crew visible, no smoke from her stack, just a ghost ship sliding through Arctic waters as if nothing had happened. As if abandonment meant nothing to her. A few months later, a group of prospectors spotted her again, in a different location. Still moving. Still afloat. Word began to spread along the Arctic coast. The abandoned ship that refused to die. The cargo steamer with no fuel, no power, no crew. Somehow navigating the most hostile waters on Earth entirely on her own. The legend of the Baychimo, the ghost ship of the Arctic, had begun. And over the next 4 decades, she would appear and disappear like a phantom, driving salvage crews to desperation and transforming from a mundane cargo vessel into something that defied rational explanation. The question wasn't just how she stayed afloat. The question was what kept driving her forward, year after year, through conditions that should have destroyed her in days. The encounters that followed would transform the Baychimo from an abandoned cargo ship into something far more unsettling. Because it's one thing to spot a derelict vessel drifting with the ice. It's another thing entirely when people actually board her and experience what waits inside. March 1933. A group of Inupiat hunters spotted the Baychimo locked in pack ice during their hunting expedition along the northern coast. These weren't naive newcomers to the Arctic. These were experienced hunters who understood the sea, the ice, and the dangers both presented. They saw an opportunity. Aboard that ghost ship might be supplies, tools, materials they could use. They climbed aboard. The ship was silent, empty. Personal belongings still scattered in the cabins where crew members had left them over a year ago. Tools hung on walls. The ship creaked and groaned with the movement of the ice. But otherwise, nothing stirred. Then the storm hit. It came without warning, as Arctic storms often do. One moment, clear skies. The next, a wall of wind and snow that made leaving the ship impossible. The hunters found themselves trapped aboard the Baychimo, riding out the blizzard in the cold steel belly of a ghost ship while the ice carried them God knows where. 10 days. They were stuck there for 10 days. Imagine it. 10 days on a ship with no heat, limited food, surrounded by the sounds of ice grinding against steel. 10 days wondering if the hull would finally give way, if they'd be crushed or drowned or frozen. 10 days in cabins where the shadows seemed to move in ways shadows shouldn't. 10 days listening to the ship groan and shift like something alive. When the storm finally broke and they could leave, the hunters made a discovery that chilled them more than any Arctic wind. The Baychimo had carried them approximately 250 miles from where they'd boarded her. 250 miles. As if the ship had a destination in mind. As if it was going somewhere, controlled by forces they couldn't see or understand. Word spread quickly among the coastal communities. The ghost ship wasn't just drifting. It was traveling. Summer 1933 brought the most detailed eyewitness account we have. On August 11th, a small schooner called the Trader was anchored off the village of Wainwright when word came that the Baychimo had been spotted just 12 miles away. The Trader's crew and their sole passenger, a remarkable Scottish botanist named Isabel Wiley Hutchison, decided to investigate. Hutchison was no stranger to harsh conditions. She'd spent years exploring the Arctic, collecting plant specimens, documenting indigenous cultures. But what she found aboard the Baychimo shook even her seasoned explorer's composure. She described the scene in her journal with vivid, haunting detail. Everything silent as a grave. In the deserted saloon, a table set with cups and saucers, ready for a meal that never came. A breakfast menu lying nearby, as if the crew had simply vanished mid-morning. In the captain's cabin, charts scattered in haphazard disarray. In the hold, sacks of furs and cargo piled in heaps or propped against walls. Gradually rotting in the cold, it was a Maritime Marie Celeste, a moment frozen in time, preserved by Arctic cold and isolation. The Trader's crew tried to break the Baychimo free, to tow her to port where she could be properly salvaged. They tied lines to her hull and strained against the ice. But the ghost ship was too large, too firmly locked in the pack ice for the smaller vessel to budge. They settled for taking what they could. Mattress, chairs, tarpaulins, a bucket of sweet pickles, a silver toast rack, sunlight dish soap, the mundane remnants of ordinary life that had become artifacts of mystery. At the same time, a group of Inupiat arrived by umiak, traditional skin boats, and took their own share of supplies. Then everyone left. The next day, the Baychimo vanished again. But here's where it gets truly strange. Throughout the Trader's journey toward Herschel Island in the Yukon, crew members kept spotting the Baychimo. They described it as hurrying north in its private ice pan. Hurrying, as if the ship had somewhere to be. Something driving it forward through waters where it should have been helpless. September 1935. Spotted off Alaska's northwest coast. November 1939. Captain Hugh Polson boarded her, determined to salvage the vessel and end this mystery once and for all. But the ice had other plans. Floes closed in around both ships. Polson had to abandon the attempt or risk his own crew and vessel. This would be the last confirmed boarding. The pattern was becoming clear, and it terrified salvage crews. Every attempt to recover the Baychimo failed. Not just failed, but failed in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Storms appeared without warning whenever someone got close. Equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. Ice floes materialized from nowhere, cutting off escape routes. Those who did manage to board reported an overwhelming sense of unease, a feeling that they weren't alone on that empty ship, that something wanted them gone. Reports filtered in through the 1,940 seconds, the 1,950 seconds, the 1,960 seconds. Different witnesses, different locations, but always the same ship, unmistakable in her profile, impossible in her survival. Trappers saw her. Inuit hunters spotted her. Sailors caught glimpses of her through Arctic fog, a rust-stained specter that vanished before anyone could reach her. By the late 1,960 seconds, the Baychimo had been drifting for 37 years, longer than any unmanned vessel in recorded history. Maritime experts couldn't explain it. Ships don't survive that long without maintenance, without crews to pump bilges and make repairs. Ships especially don't survive the Arctic, where ice can crush a reinforced hull like paper. Yet there she was, still floating, still wandering, still defying every law of probability and physics. Then came 1,969, the final sighting. That group of Inupiat hunters between Icy Cape and Point Barrow, spotting a rusted hulk locked in pack ice. No name visible on the bow, but they knew, everyone along that coast knew, it could only be one ship. After that, silence. Absolute. Total silence. 54 years and counting since anyone has seen the Baychimo. No wreckage found. No debris. No closure. Just a ghost ship that appeared for 38 years and then vanished as mysteriously as it had persisted. The question that haunts maritime historians isn't just where the Baychimo is now. It's what kept her afloat for so impossibly long. And why? After decades of appearing and disappearing like clockwork, did she finally choose to vanish for good? So what really happened to the Baychimo? How did an ordinary cargo ship survive nearly 4 decades in conditions that destroy modern vessels in weeks? And why did every attempt to salvage her fail in ways that seem to defy coincidence? Let's start with the rational explanations, the ones grounded in science and maritime knowledge. The Arctic Ocean operates under its own rules. Currents flow in complex patterns influenced by water temperature, salinity, wind, and the seasonal movements of pack ice. Author and maritime historian Anthony Dalton suggests the Baychimo simply became caught in a natural cycle, the Beaufort Gyre, a massive circular current system in the Arctic Ocean, could have carried the ship in a slow, perpetual loop through the Beaufort and Chukchi seas. Wind patterns would have pushed her ice platform in predictable directions. Season after season, year after year. No mystery, just oceanography. The ship's construction also played a crucial role. Swedish shipbuilders in 1914 didn't cut corners. They built vessels meant to last. The Baychimo's steel hull was reinforced, designed specifically to handle ice pressure. Unlike wooden ships that splinter and crack, steel can flex under pressure, absorbing impacts that would destroy lesser materials. Her hull was solid, with fewer compartments than modern ships, meaning less opportunity for catastrophic flooding if one section breached. Then there's simple luck. The Baychimo might have ridden on relatively flat ice pans, avoiding the pressure ridges where competing ice flows collide and grind together with forces that can crush submarines. Each time witnesses spotted her, she was typically locked in ice, not being actively crushed by it. Perhaps she just had the fortune to avoid the worst of the Arctic's wrath, floating in a sweet spot between destruction and preservation. The airtight compartments theory offers another rational explanation. If the Baychimo's cargo holds remained sufficiently sealed, trapped air would provide natural buoyancy even if parts of the hull suffered damage. Ships can stay afloat with remarkable amounts of internal flooding as long as enough compartments retain their integrity. The cold would have slowed deterioration of seals and gaskets. The ship might have been slowly dying, but dying so gradually that decades passed before she finally went under. These explanations satisfy the rational mind. They account for the facts without requiring anything supernatural. Case closed. Mystery solved. Except they don't explain everything. They don't explain why storms appeared with such uncanny timing whenever salvage attempts were made. They don't explain the reports from experienced sailors who described the ship as hurrying north, as having purpose in its movements. They don't explain what those Inupiat hunters felt during their 10 days trapped aboard, or why the ship carried them 250 miles as if delivering them somewhere specific. Maritime culture has always understood something that science struggles to quantify. Ships have spirits. Sailors have known this for thousands of years. Not ghosts in the conventional sense, but something else. A presence. An accumulation of years at sea. Of storms survived. Of human lives lived and lost aboard. When you abandon a ship that's still seaworthy, still whole, sailors believe you're committing a transgression. You're breaking a covenant. The Baychimo was abandoned while fully intact. Her crew didn't go down with her. They walked away, left her to the ice while she could still sail. In maritime tradition, that's a curse. A ship abandoned doesn't rest easy. Perhaps that's nothing more than superstition. The same old sailors' tales that have circulated since humans first put to sea. Or perhaps there's something to it. Consider the pattern of failures that plagued salvage attempts. In November 1939, Captain Polson boarded the Baychimo with professional equipment and an experienced crew, fully intending to tow her to port. Then ice floes appeared, closing in from multiple directions simultaneously. He barely escaped with his crew. Multiple other attempts through the 1,930 seconds and 1,940 seconds met similar fates. Equipment failures, sudden weather changes, ice conditions that shifted from manageable to deadly in minutes. One incident might be bad luck, two might be coincidence. But decade after decade of consistent failure, that stretches coincidence past the breaking point. Some salvagers began to whisper about the ship being cursed, about it not wanting to be saved, about forces at work that had nothing to do with weather patterns or ocean currents. The indigenous communities along Alaska's northern coast developed their own understanding of the Baychimo. Not all saw her as evil or cursed. Some viewed the ghost ship as a guide, a spirit of the sea that proved the Arctic wasn't empty, even in its most desolate reaches. For hunters crossing vast expanses of ice, spotting the Baychimo meant you weren't alone. Something else existed in that white void. Something that had survived against all odds, just as they were trying to survive. There's a particular detail that troubles even skeptics. The ship's movements weren't entirely random. Witnesses repeatedly spotted her in the same general region, between Point Barrow and the Canadian Arctic, as if she had territory she patrolled, as if she was bound to certain waters, unable or unwilling to drift into the North Atlantic or toward Russian shores. Ships caught in the Beaufort Gyre should eventually drift eastward, toward Greenland and beyond. But the Baychimo never did. She stayed in Arctic waters near Alaska, appearing and reappearing like she was standing watch over something. David Reamer, an Alaskan historian who has extensively researched the Baychimo, points out the most troubling aspect of the entire mystery. There's no body. Ships leave evidence when they sink. Debris washes ashore. Oil slicks appear. Wreckage gets caught in fishing nets. In an age of satellite imagery, sonar mapping, and underwater drones, we found countless shipwrecks from centuries past. Yet, despite targeted searches by the Alaskan government, despite advances in technology, despite the ship being made of 1,300 tons of steel, the Baychimo has left no trace. It's as if she simply ceased to exist. Not sank, not wrecked, just vanished from reality itself. In 2006, the Alaskan government launched an official project to locate the Baychimo and approximately 4,000 other ships lost along Alaska's coast. They assembled experts in maritime archaeology, oceanography, and Arctic conditions. They used sonar, they consulted historical records, plotted drift patterns, calculated probabilities. They found nothing. Some maritime historian, including Anthony Dalton, I believe most sightings after 1933 were cases of mistaken identity, desperate prospectors and isolated hunters seeing what they wanted to see, mistaking ice formations or other derelict vessels for the famous ghost ship. It's a rational position. Human perception is fallible, especially under harsh conditions where survival depends on hope. But it doesn't account for the detailed descriptions. The specific damage patterns witnesses described, the rust staining in particular places, the missing propeller that multiple independent sources reported, the crack along one side of the hull that both the trader crew and later observers noted. These weren't vague sightings of something in the distance. These were close encounters with consistent, verifiable details. So we're left with two possibilities, neither entirely satisfying. Either the Baychimo survived through a combination of exceptional construction, favorable currents, and extraordinary luck, only to finally sink sometime after 1,969 inches, a location we haven't yet discovered. Or something else was at work. Something that kept that ship afloat and moving for reasons we don't understand and perhaps aren't meant to. The SS Baychimo, an ordinary steel cargo ship, no ancient curse carved into her hull, no murders committed on her decks, no dark ritual performed in her hold. Just a working vessel doing the brutal job of Arctic trade until the ice took her and her crew walked away. But she refused to die. 38 years. Nearly 4 decades drifting through the most hostile waters on Earth. No fuel, no crew, no power. Just a steel ghost appearing and disappearing through Arctic mist, driving experienced sailors to desperation and transforming every rational explanation into another question that can't be answered. Ships don't survive unmanned in the Arctic. The ice crushes them. Storms tear them apart. The relentless cycle of freezing and thawing breaks them down piece by piece. Yet somehow, this unremarkable Swedish-built cargo steamer became something extraordinary. Something that still haunts the waters between Point Barrow and Icy Cape. Whether as wreckage on the ocean floor or something that continues to drift beyond our ability to find it. The story of the Baychimo isn't just about a ship. It's about the 15 men who built a wooden shelter on the ice and refused to abandon their vessel until they had no choice. It's about Captain Sidney Cornwell, whose warnings went unheeded, who stayed until the end, who made the agonizing decision to walk away from the ship he'd commanded for 9 years. It's about Inupiat hunters trapped for 10 days aboard a derelict vessel, not knowing if they'd survive, discovering they'd been carried hundreds of miles by forces they couldn't control. It's about Isabel Wiley Hutchison, that remarkable Scottish botanist who climbed aboard the ghost ship in search of Arctic flowers and left us one of the most haunting descriptions in maritime history. Everything silent as a grave. A table set for breakfast that never came. Charts scattered like the last thoughts of a crew that had vanished into the ice. These were real people. The Baychimo was a real ship. The 38 years of documented sightings aren't folklore or legend. They're recorded history, verified by multiple independent witnesses, many of whom had no knowledge of previous encounters. This happened. All of it happened. Ships rarely survive unmanned for so long, especially in waters where pack ice can crush a reinforced hull like an aluminum can. The most likely explanation is that the Baychimo finally succumbed to the Arctic sometime after 1969, settling to the cold, muddy bottom of the Beaufort Sea, where she waits to be discovered. 54 years have passed since that last sighting. By now, she's almost certainly found her final resting place. Almost certainly, but no one knows for sure. No wreckage.
No debris field.
No sonar contact despite targeted searches by government agencies with resources and technology that would have seemed like magic to Captain Cornwell and his crew. The Alaskan government is still looking. Still hoping to solve a mystery that began in the winter of 1931. What if she's still out there, not floating free? Perhaps. But locked in a massive ice floe in some unexplored region of the Arctic Ocean. Preserved in a frozen tomb. Waiting for climate change to release her one final time. What if future generations will spot her again? Rust-stained and battered, but still impossibly intact. Still refusing to sink. Still carrying whatever presence or purpose kept her afloat for all those years? The indigenous peoples of Alaska's north coast have their own answer. Some believe the Baychimo found where she belongs. In waters that remember her, that hold her story, the way ice holds memories, frozen in its depths. Not dead. Not alive. But existing in that liminal space between the physical and the spiritual that the Arctic has always occupied in human imagination. So, what do you believe? Do you think the Baychimo was just a well-built ship riding favorable currents for an improbably long time before finally sinking in a location we haven't yet searched? A mystery with a rational explanation waiting to be discovered? Or do you believe there was something more? Something about that abandoned ship, that betrayal of the covenant between vessel and crew, that kept her wandering the Arctic like a lost soul, searching for the men who left her behind. Something that made storms appear when salvagers got close. That carried Inupiat hunters 250 miles, as if the ship had destinations in mind. That kept her appearing in the same waters decade after decade, as if she was bound there by forces beyond oceanography. Why did every salvage attempt fail? Why did experienced captains with proper equipment consistently describe conditions turning deadly the moment they tried to recover her? Why has no wreckage ever been found despite exhaustive searches? And here's the question that should keep you awake at night. If you were an Inupiat hunter crossing the ice on a winter evening, and you saw a massive steel shape emerge from the Arctic fog, rust-stained and silent, would you approach it? Would you climb aboard to investigate? Would you risk becoming another chapter in the legend of the ship that refuses to die? Maybe you'd find answers. Maybe you'd discover where she's been hiding for the last 54 years. Maybe you'd finally solve the mystery that has haunted maritime historians since 1931. Or maybe, like so many before you, you'd add your own impossible story to the legend. Another encounter with the ghost ship that can't be explained, can't be verified, can't be anything except what it is. A steel vessel with a will of its own, still wandering the Arctic, still waiting for something, still refusing to give up her secrets. The SS Baychimo departed in 1931. She was last seen in 1969. But somewhere between the documented history and the unexplainable encounters, between the rational theories and the stories whispered in Arctic villages, the truth still drifts, waiting in the ice, waiting in the fog, waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to find it. Is it truth buried under decades of mystery, or just legend born from desperation in the white hell of the Arctic? That's for you to decide. But the Baychimo herself, she's not telling. Not yet. Maybe not ever,